This is definitely a car for somebody who wants to be seen in a Range Rover, that is. What's good? This is Rio, and today I'm in a Land Rover Range Rover Evoque P250S. Super long name. I just call it the Range Rover Evoque. I'm sure most of you do too. All right, so yeah, we're in a 2021 Range Rover Evoque. This car was facelifted in the 20 model year, so last year. Got refreshed headlights, taillights, basically a couple design cues from the Range Rover Velar, which is a killer, slotted right above this car between this and the Range Rover Sport. So also this car got a slightly refreshed interior, again bringing it up to date along with the rest of the Range Rover and Land Rover lineup. And in this red color, it's certainly not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's a small little baby Range. It has the classic Range Rover styling that definitely draws in your attention, and the fact that it's red only enhances that appeal and draw that it has. However, on the flip side, this is a car that not everybody loves. It is seen as the baby Range. It is worthy to note that because it starts off at the very bottom of the Range Rover line, it does kind of struggle to bring in some of the luxury components that separate Range Rover from Land Rover. I personally believe this car in some ways is more similar to a Land Rover Discovery Sport than it is to, let's say, a Range Rover Sport or even a Velar. So today we're going to talk about some of the basic features and specs of this car. I'm going to discuss whether or not I believe it really is a baby Range that's worthwhile. And lastly, we're going to take it for a little drive, see how it feels, and most importantly, see if it's worth buying. This car starts just a hair under $43,000, and as this one sits, still being relatively base, it's just around $50,000. So Range Rover separates the Evoque into 3 different trims. What you have to do is decide which trim you like to start off with. Do you want a base car? Do you want an R-Dynamic car, which is a more sporty car similar to an M Sport, an S-Line, an AMG kit type car? Or do you want a first edition car, which is kind of like the creme de la creme of the Evoque line? Then as you dive into each one, let's say you pick the base trim to start, then there's the S, the SE, and the HSE, which further let you choose what packages and options the car comes with. An S comes with almost nothing, an SE comes with some stuff, and an HSE is basically fully loaded, again, still leaving a few options left to be ticked. So this car has the P250 motor, which is a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder, good for 246 horsepower and 269 pound-feet of torque. And out of the R-Dynamic trim, which is already more sporty, you can get a little bit more power. Out of that same turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder, you can now get 296 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. So about 50 more horsepower and about 30-ish more pound-feet of torque. All of that to kind of evoke a little bit more sportiness out of this platform and to match, let's say, the sportier exterior styling of the R-Dynamic. So this car is unmistakably Range Rover from the outside. The headlights are immediately Range Rover. The taillights are now very similar to those found on the Velar. And the overall styling definitely reads Range Rover. It's just that this car is quite a bit smaller than the rest of the Range Rover lineup, while the Velar and the Sport are nearly the same size. And the full-size Range Rover definitely is quite a bit bigger than even they are. This kind of sits way at the bottom as a compact SUV. It has that wedge style design where the windows kind of get smaller and smaller as they go towards the rear, leaving you with a very small rear windshield. What you do get is a nice high window line that makes you feel like you're in a sportier car than maybe you are. However, while it looks quite cool, it can be inconvenient to have such a small rear windshield because of rear visibility. This car also now features something that you found originally in the Velar, which are the pop-out door handles, something that usually I don't like. In this case, I don't mind them because it gives you that sleek Range Rover styling on the outside without a door handle protruding, and only when you need it, it pops out. It also adds to kind of the mystique and maybe a charm of this car where you show up to a Range Rover, you want something a little extra special than, let's say, a BMW or a Mercedes or an Audi, you get the door handles that pop out. I'm sure other brands are soon to follow. Inside, you get a really nice center screen now that is able to electronically tilt forward and back. And what you really get, that's the coolest thing that comes over from the new facelifted full-size Range Rover, from the new facelifted Sport, and from the Velar, is this digital lower screen. They call this the Touch Pro Duo. And what I love about this lower screen is you can either control your AC, your climate control, or you can click over to vehicle and you can change your vehicle settings, such as going into eco, off-road, sand, yada, yada, yada. I really like that. I think that it's super intuitive, and this screen in particular makes the car quite nice to interact with. However, the screen up top is a little bit laggy and not my favorite interface. Here on the steering wheel, you find haptic feedback buttons that are lit up in the sense that they turn off completely when the car is off, and they're able to turn on as the car turns on to give you this really cool sensation of luxury. Again, this is one of those areas, along with the Touch Pro Duo, that make you feel like you're in a very upscale car, very similar to the rest of the Range Rover lineup. What's optional for the Evoque is a full interactive digital display here in the cluster, and I would say it's basically a must-have. Unfortunately, this car doesn't have it, but for only $550 you can get it. It definitely even more so makes this cabin feel luxurious and upscale, which I think again is right in line with the Range Rover branding, so you kind of should grab it. This feels a bit more like a Land Rover or a Jaguar gauge, which I'm not a huge fan of. And luckily for this car, it gets the Meridian audio system, which does pretty well. It's not quite as crisp as, let's say, a Burmester or Harman Kardon system, even a Bang & Olufsen you might find in the German counterparts of this car, but it does the job, and it's definitely better than the very base system found in this car. What I will say regarding competitors is that this car kind of sits in a weird middle ground, where its main direct competitors to me are the Audi Q3, the Volvo XC40, maybe the Lexus UX, but it kind of sits in between cars like the Lexus UX and the NX, the BMW X1 and X3. So it's kind of smaller than some, bigger than others, but what that does for this car is kind of put it in a category all on its own. But before we take this car out on a drive and see how it does, I want to talk about a couple of things I don't love. It's missing a memory function for the driver's seat, so you can't put in your seat if you share this car with somebody and just press M1, M2, whatever to get back to your usual seating position, which I think really should be standard on a car at this price range and of this, let's say, caliber of luxury. You also miss out on a electric closing trunk. Another thing that, again, both doesn't allow you to use the kick function you find in so many cars nowadays, especially within this price segment, but it's kind of inconvenient to have to close the trunk, especially a nice, heavy, solid trunk that this car has. You would expect, again, in a Range Rover, an electric folding trunk. On the flip side of things, this car does get a beautiful panoramic sunroof. No, it does not open, but just like the Jaguar E-Pace, it's absolutely enormous, and it extends all the way back to the rear headrests. So I actually prefer this over a sunroof that opens because it gives you all the light you want. So the interior, just like the exterior, definitely still emulates that Range Rover vibe. You do have a nice soft touch dash with a cool pattern on it. You do get the steering wheel with the cool buttons and the Touch Pro Duo. I just wish you didn't have the budgety type buttons over here. I wish you had the seat memory. I wish you had that auto folding trunk, or auto closing trunk, excuse me. But at the same time, and to be fair, this is still relatively budget and is the entry-level Range Rover, so I understand why they have to take some things away to draw you into, let's say, a Velar or a Range Rover Sport if you wanted some things, or you can pay for a higher, more loaded version of this car, although I would then just jump up to the Velar once I was leaving this relative price segment around $50,000. And that's another area where I think the XC40 really wins out, is that in the low 40s, it's able to provide most that this car offers, and in some ways actually excels. So all food for thought. Definitely check the XC40 out, but let's take this car for a drive and see how it does. Before we do that, let's do the tall boy test. So without further ado, here it is. So pulling the Evoque out onto the road, one of the first things that I've noticed is that the side view mirrors are quite delightful. I think they either are the exact same mirrors found in the rest of the Range Rover lineup and Land Rover lineup, or they're at least very similar, but for this size of car, they're quite large and they definitely give you a lot of rearward visibility. Unfortunately, I was correct in my assumption that the rear visibility was not going to be so great because of the sloping rear roof line. You kind of miss a lot of vertical visibility. You know, horizontally it's decent, even that is a little bit small, but you just don't get to see much past about a car or two lengths behind you just because the roof cuts off your field of view. So that's a little bit frustrating. What's cool is that on certain trim levels of this car, there is an optional digital mirror in which you can flick a switch, and kind of similar to the Corvette, the C8 Corvette, if you guys have seen that, it will display a video feed of your rear that is a little camera that can be found on the rear shark fin antenna on top. So the steering feels quite heavy and direct, particularly considering I am currently in comfort mode. Steering feels nice and weighted. Yeah, it definitely feels direct, and the car feels very easy to drive. This is the type of car that I would suggest for just about anybody regardless of experience, driving skill, or preference. I mean, just one of those point and shoot type cars, very comfortable, very easy to drive. I must admit that driving this car definitely does give you that Range Rover feeling. If not for just the badge on the steering wheel and the mirrors, you definitely feel like I'm in a more luxurious car than, let's say, a BMW X1 or some of the other cars that this car competes with. It feels premium in a certain sense, and it definitely looks premium. This is definitely a car for somebody who wants to be seen in a Range Rover, that is, because it has the classic Range Rover styling. It's unmistakably Range Rover. It has the black roof, which in this particular case with the red car, with the red body and the black wheels, looks quite nice. Unfortunately, this car being the base S trim misses out on the cooler premium LED headlights and Highline taillights. It's not a world of difference, to be honest, but it only enhances the look and makes this car look a bit more Range Rover-y. I would say the perfect spec on an Evoque, if you want it to be budget friendly but kind of get the most bang for buck, is a R Dynamic SE. It definitely will creep into the mid 50s, but if you want that Range Rover, let's say, vibe, and you don't want to miss out on things you might find in a less expensive car, you kind of have to meet in the middle and pay the price. So other than the suspension being a bit rougher than I was hoping over undulations and bumps, the car itself drives quite nicely. In fact, better than I was expecting. I've spent some time in a full-size Range Rover that, despite the settings you put it in, felt a bit floaty and loose. And this thing feels a bit more buttoned down, put together, and I'm certainly always a fan of that. The one thing I will say if you're considering buying this car is that you should know that there are cars that will give you more options, features, and luxury, for that matter, for the same, if not less money. However, if you're interested in having a car that has a Range Rover badge on it, a car that looks and feels like a Range Rover, and in fact a car that is quite nice at the end of the day, and definitely turns heads a bit more than the average compact SUV, then this very well might be that. And on that bombshell, I gotta give this car a vibe pass, and I would say that this car is just a vibe. It's not the wildest, coolest, craziest, most luxurious car, but it's a baby Range. I'm not opposed to it. I would just maybe say that if you're budget conscious, this maybe is not the best option, and in fact, you can get a bit more for your money looking elsewhere. With that said, I'm out. This is Rio. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Tune back in for more. Peace.